October 27, 1942. First light breaks over the South Pacific. 420 miles northeast of Guadalcanal, the horizon glows with something terrible. Commander Edward P. Parker stands motionless at the rail of USS Northampton, watching the last piece of USS Hornet vanish into the ocean. The carrier burns as she sinks, her ruptured fuel tanks sending columns of flame across the water. 140 American sailors die with her. But what Parker sees is worse than the immediate loss. He's watching the Fourth Fleet carrier slip away in 10 months. The flames reflecting off the waves show him something that chills him more than any cold ocean could. 4 carriers in 10 months, he writes later in his private log, words dangerous enough to end his career if anyone reads them. At this rate, there will be nothing left by Christmas. The mathematics haunt him. Lexington went down in May at Coral Sea. Yorktown fell in June after Midway. Wasp burned in September off Guadalcanal. Now Hornet, 4 gone. The American Pacific carrier force is bleeding out, and the Japanese Navy keeps appearing with fresh ships, as if they have an endless supply. The officers back home dismissed the Japanese as mere imitators, unable to create anything original. Yet here they are, systematically destroying American naval power while their own shipyards somehow keep producing more. 3,700 miles away, in Newport News, Virginia, a woman named Margaret Thompson is about to start a night shift. She doesn't know Commander Parker. He doesn't know her. Neither of them understands that this exact moment, this low point where American naval strength seems broken beyond repair, marks the beginning of something unprecedented. What's about to unfold in the shipyards will rewrite everything. Not through brilliant tactics or exceptional seamanship, but through welding torches, assembly lines, and the sheer productive power of a nation finally fully awake to the demands of total war. The disaster had started months earlier, on May 8th in the Coral Sea. USS Lexington, one of America's 2 great pre-war carriers built from old battlecruiser hulls, took 2 torpedoes and 3 bomb hits from Japanese aircraft. The damage control teams fought heroically, but gasoline vapors from the shattered aviation fuel tanks created secondary explosions that tore through the ship. Lady Lex sank, taking 216 crew members with her. Captain Frederick Sherman, commanding her, would later stand before Congress and speak plainly about the mathematics of the war. "We started with 7 fleet carriers in the Pacific," he testified. Japan had 10. Every admiral understood what that meant. You couldn't afford to lose them one for one. Trading evenly was impossible. 4 weeks later, USS Yorktown went down. She'd been patched together in just 48 hours at Pearl Harbor after the Coral Sea damage, ready to fight again at Midway. That battle was a strategic victory for America. 4 Japanese carriers burned, but Yorktown never left that place. Japanese submarine I-168 put torpedoes into her, and she followed the battle's conclusion to the bottom. September brought the 3rd blow. USS Wasp, operating near Guadalcanal, took 3 torpedo hits from Japanese submarine I-19. She burned for hours, then American destroyers finished her, scuttling what was left. By October, America had lost half its operational fleet carriers. Then came the knockout punch. October 26 to 27, the Battle of Santa Cruz. USS Hornet, the same carrier that flew the Doolittle raid bombers that fought at Midway, fell under coordinated Japanese attacks. Dive bombers and torpedo planes descended on her. American sailors tried everything to save her, even attempting to tow the burning ship to safety. But Japanese surface forces closed in. The carriers were abandoned. Japanese destroyers finished the job in the dark hours before dawn. In Washington, Admiral Ernest King, the Chief of Naval Operations, faced Congress with numbers that looked like surrender. "Gentlemen, we have exactly 1 operational fleet carrier left in the Pacific. That's Enterprise. The Japanese have 10. The mathematics," he said quietly, "suggest we've already lost this war." But King didn't know about Margaret Thompson. He didn't know about the 1.7 million workers who would soon flood American shipyards. He didn't know about Henry Kaiser, who was about to prove that Liberty ships could be built in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes instead of 230 days. He didn't know that American yards, which had launched 1 fleet carrier in all of 1941, were about to achieve something that seemed impossible. The transformation began in offices, not battle rooms. At Newport News Shipbuilding, Yard Supervisor Clay Bedford called his foremen together the day after Pearl Harbor. He told them something radical. Forget everything you know about how carriers are made. We're going to build them the way Henry Ford builds automobiles. A woman named Helen Matthews, a former seamstress hired as part of the emergency expansion, was watching skilled workers pound rivets into metal plates, thousands of individual rivets, each one requiring time and precision. She asked her supervisor why they didn't weld instead, running one continuous seam rather than creating thousands of separate connection points. He laughed at her. Then he stopped laughing. Welding could cut assembly time by 3/4. More importantly, welding required different skills, simpler skills, skills that could be taught in days rather than the years needed to develop a master riveter. The change unlocked everything. By summer 1943, Essex-class carriers began rolling off the construction ways at a pace that seemed impossible. USS Essex herself, laid down in April 1941, was commissioned by the end of December 1942. That was less than 20 months from start to combat readiness. But that was just the beginning. At Brooklyn Navy Yard, shipfitter Giuseppe Di Maggio, who happened to be a cousin of the baseball legend, led crews that invented a new way to install aircraft elevators. Instead of building them piece by piece inside the ship, they assembled entire elevator platforms on shore, then used massive cranes to lower them into position. That single innovation saved 6 weeks per carrier. The prefabrication techniques spreading from Kaiser's yards revolutionized everything. Deck houses and fixtures were built in assembly areas on their sides or upside down, making welding stronger and faster. What once required 1,000 workers for a month now took 200 workers a week. The carriers started appearing with accelerating speed. USS Yorktown CV-10 was laid down December 1941, commissioned April 1943. USS Intrepid, same dates for keel laying, commissioned August 1943. USS Hornet CV-12, laid down in August 1942, commissioned November 1943. USS Franklin, laid down December 1942, commissioned January 1944. The launching dates compressed. Philippa Kellogg, a welder at Bethlehem Steel's shipyard, kept careful records of what she was witnessing. January 1943, launching a carrier every 60 days. June 1943, every 45 days. December 1943, every 30 days. The Japanese must think we're performing magic, she wrote. The magic was human. By April 1943, 40% of Kaiser's yard workers were women. Emma Rodriguez, a Mexican-American mother of 3 who'd never held anything larger than a sewing needle, became the fastest riveter at Norfolk Naval Shipyard. She drove 30 rivets a minute, each one perfect. African-American workers, previously blocked from skilled shipyard jobs, poured in after Executive Order 8802 banned discrimination in defense work. James Washington, a sharecropper from Alabama, became the master pipe fitter at Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. He installed fuel lines on 5 carriers, each one completed faster than the one before. The workers understood what they were building for. Every day without enough carriers meant more sailors and Marines dying on Pacific islands. Photographs from the fleet hung on every shipyard wall. USS Enterprise fights alone. She needs sisters. Build them now. Speed came from human effort and revolutionary techniques alike. Engineers at New York Naval Yard developed modular construction. Instead of building upward from the keel, they built complete sections with all wiring, plumbing, and ventilation already installed. These massive modules assembled like building blocks. Standardization became absolute. Every pump identical, every electrical panel identical, every fitting identical wherever possible. Parts built in Detroit could be installed in carriers under construction in Newport News, Brooklyn, or Philadelphia without any modification. Construction time compressed to as little as 14 months. The Essex-class carriers became the most significant warship class in American naval history. They weren't just replacements. They were bigger, faster, more capable than anything that came before. Each displaced 27,100 tons, carried 90 to 100 aircraft, and steamed at 33 knots. faster than most destroyers. The Japanese intelligence officers who read the reports understood what they meant. Commander Masatake Okumiya, air staff officer with the Japanese Combined Fleet, wrote in his diary after receiving damage assessments and production reports, "The Americans are building carriers faster than we can train pilots to fly them. Each new carrier is superior to anything we possess. We are not fighting the same Navy that attacked Pearl Harbor." By March 1944, American shipyards had achieved what seemed impossible, launching Essex-class carriers at a rate that exceeded the combined production of every other nation on Earth. While major naval yards built fleet carriers, Henry Kaiser revolutionized escort carrier construction. These smaller jeep carriers would provide air cover for invasion forces and hunt submarines. Kaiser's Vancouver yard alone produced 50 escort carriers, using techniques developed for Liberty ships. USS Casablanca, lead ship of the most numerous carrier class ever built, went from keel laying to commissioning in less than 8 months. The Japanese escort carrier Shinyo, converted from a passenger liner, had taken 2 years to complete. The comparison told the entire story. Behind every rivet, every weld, every steel plate ran a supply chain stretching across the continent, connecting factories and mills and shipyards in a symphony of production that had never existed before. The steel for those flight decks originated in Pittsburgh, where the furnaces never stopped burning. The mills ran continuously, day and night, 7 days every single week without pause. The aluminum needed for the aircraft came streaming out of Alcoa's Tennessee facilities, drawing so much electricity that entire cities would have dimmed if those plants had suddenly gone dark. Over in Akron, Ohio, the Goodyear plant had a very specific mission. They produced the arresting cables for carrier decks, cables with enough stopping power to haul down a fighter jet weighing 12,000 pounds while traveling at 100 miles per hour. The plant's manager, William Davis, watched the numbers climb steadily upward. In 1942, the facility produced 10 of these cables each month. By 1944, that number had jumped to 200 monthly. The real problem wasn't building the ships themselves. The real problem was finding the people to operate them. The answer arrived in the form of Captain Daniel Gallery's proposal. He suggested something that seemed almost crazy at the time: use the Great Lakes as a massive training ground. 2 converted paddle-wheel steamers, the USS Wolverine and USS Sable, became floating classrooms. Operating from Chicago's Navy Pier, these improvised carriers began turning out pilots at breathtaking speed. By 1944, 500 pilots per month came through their training program. Across the Pacific, the situation looked very different through Japanese eyes. In Tokyo, the Imperial Naval Staff studied their intelligence reports with mounting dread. Captain Toshikazu Omi held the position of operations officer for the Combined Fleet. When he later reflected on those days, his testimony revealed the terrible calculus they were facing. "We knew America would construct new carriers to replace the ones they lost," he said. "We estimated perhaps 6 or 7 fleet carriers might emerge by 1945. Nothing could have prepared them for reality." General Gisaburo Ozawa commanded the Japanese carrier force when the Battle of the Philippine Sea erupted in June 1944. He sailed into battle with 6 carriers. The American fleet possessed 9 fleet carriers and 8 light carriers. When it was over, Ozawa looked back with the clarity of someone who had witnessed something beyond military defeat. "It was not a battle," he wrote. "It was an execution." By January 1945, the American shipyards had found their rhythm. The rhythm seemed to defy every natural law of production. Brooklyn Navy Yard juggled 3 carriers in various stages of completion simultaneously. Newport News had carriers sitting on 6 different slipways at the same time, each one moving toward launch. The USS Lake Champlain set a record that still stands. Commissioned on June 3, 1945, this Essex-class carrier went from keel laid to ready for combat in just 15 months. That speed carried a human price that shouldn't be forgotten. Over 3,000 shipyard workers lost their lives during the war. Marguerite O'Brien watched a crane cable suddenly snap at Fall River Shipyard. Her husband was directly underneath. He died instantly. The next week, she returned to the same spot. She took his place on the welding crew, When her co-workers asked why she came back, her answer was simple and devastating. "Every ship we don't build means more gold stars in windows," she told them. "I'm not going to be responsible for that." When Japan's surrender delegation boarded the USS Missouri on September 2, 1945, they encountered a sight that seemed to stretch beyond the horizon itself. Over 100 carriers of every type filled Tokyo Bay and the waters surrounding it. More carriers than all the other nations on Earth had built since naval aviation began. Commander Tamichi Hara, one of Japan's most celebrated destroyer captains, carried the weight of that knowledge. He had personally sunk 4 American carriers in 1942. 4 carriers he had sent to the bottom. America had replaced each one 3 times over. 3 replacements for every loss. The mathematics of industrial war made his head spin. The Essex-class carriers that actually saw combat in the Pacific War represented the core of this production miracle. The USS Essex herself commissioned on December 31, 1942. The USS Yorktown, CV-10, entered service on April 15, 1943. The USS Intrepid launched on August 16, 1943. The USS Hornet followed on November 29, 1943. The USS Franklin came next, commissioned January 31, 1944. The USS Ticonderoga joined the fleet on May 8, 1944. The USS Randolph entered service on October 9, 1944. The USS Lexington, surprisingly given the storied history of the name, didn't commission until February 17, 1943. The USS Bunker Hill launched on May 24, 1943. The USS Wasp followed on November 24, 1943. The USS Hancock arrived on April 15, 1944. The USS Bennington entered service on August 6, 1944. The USS Bonhomme Richard commissioned on November 26, 1944. The USS Shangri-La launched on September 15, 1944. Beyond these combat carriers, additional Essex-class ships came off the ways but never fired on an enemy. The USS Boxer commissioned on April 16, 1945. The USS Lake Champlain, already mentioned for its speed record, commissioned on June 3, 1945. The USS Antietam entered service on January 28, 1945. Several more would be completed after the war ended. This accounting didn't even include the 9 Independence-class light carriers built on converted cruiser hulls, or the over 100 escort carriers that rolled out of American yards during the same period. The innovations born in those shipyards transformed American industry forever. Modular construction techniques developed for wartime survival became standard practice. Automated welding systems that had been experimental suddenly became essential. Assembly line shipbuilding, borrowed from automobile factories and adapted for massive vessels, proved revolutionary. These methods stayed embedded in American manufacturing long after the war ended. The workers themselves became something new. Women who learned to weld during the emergency discovered they possessed talents they never knew they had. They mastered industrial work that their society had told them was impossible. African American workers, restricted to menial labor before the war, demonstrated they could perform the most demanding precision tasks with excellence. Those old restrictions didn't dissolve easily, but they began to crack under the weight of undeniable proof. By 1945, American carriers were being completed faster than the Navy could find trained crews to operate them. The production line had simply outpaced everything else. Admiral William Halsey testified before Congress in 1946, his voice still carrying the amazement. "We went from having too few carriers to having more than we could possibly use," he said. "No nation in history has ever produced combat vessels at such a rate." 4 decades later, on the 40th anniversary of VJ Day in 1985, Newport News Shipbuilding held a reunion. Over 5,000 former workers showed up. Margaret Thompson, the welder from earlier in our story, now 67 years old, stood before the assembled crowd. People called them the greatest generation. She wanted to set the record straight about that. "We weren't great," she said. "We were angry. The Japanese sank our ships and killed our boys. We answered the only way we could. We built more ships than they could possibly imagine. Every single rivet we drove carried a message. Remember Pearl Harbor, it said. The transformation reached far beyond military capability. Richmond, California exploded in growth. In just 3 years, the population swelled from 23,000 to 130,000. The wages paid to shipyard workers, over $3 billion, flowed through the American economy like lifeblood. That money built the American middle class. Families could buy homes and educate children and dream about futures that had seemed impossible before. The shipyards themselves became laboratories for social change. Women proved they could do industrial work. African Americans proved they could do precision manufacturing. The barriers that had stood for generations suddenly looked ridiculous when confronted with the evidence. These workers performed at every level with competence and skill. By August 1945, the United States Navy had 14 Essex-class fleet carriers that had seen actual combat. 3 additional Essex-class carriers had been completed but never fired a shot in anger. 9 Independence-class light carriers were in service. 71 escort carriers had been built. The older carriers from before the war still served in various roles. Japan faced this reality with 6 operational carriers, most of them crewed by pilots without adequate training. Britain possessed 19 carriers of all types. The numerical advantage wasn't just overwhelming. It was almost incomprehensible. In 1962, Rear Admiral Hideo Yano of the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force visited Norfolk Naval Shipyard, where many Essex-class carriers had been constructed. He stood on the spot where the USS Yorktown had taken the water for her maiden voyage. Through an interpreter, he offered his reflection. "We knew you were building ships," he said, "but we could never have imagined this scale. How does a nation fight an enemy that can construct in one single yard what we built with our entire empire?" He paused, then delivered his final assessment. "We didn't lose to your navy," he continued. "We lost to your factories. We lost to your workers. We lost to your determination to produce beyond every rational limit." Admiral Chester Nimitz, the man who orchestrated victory in the Pacific, offered the definitive conclusion years later. "The war was decided in 1943, he stated, but not by any battle. It was decided by the launching of new carriers. When we could lose a carrier and have 2 replacements already at sea, while Japan couldn't replace any losses at all, the outcome became mathematically certain. Victory wasn't uncertain from that moment forward. The legacy of that production miracle persists today. The techniques pioneered between 1942 and 1945 remain standard in shipbuilding operations worldwide, but the deepest legacy goes beyond technique. It stands as proof of what democratic societies can accomplish when united in common purpose. In 36 months, America transformed from a nation that had lost 4 carriers and faced potential defeat to a power possessing overwhelming carrier supremacy. That supremacy made victory not just likely, but inevitable. The workers demonstrated something crucial. Democracy's greatest weapon isn't military hardware. It's productive capacity. It's the ability of free people to outbuild, outproduce, and overwhelm tyranny. The transformation stands as history's most extraordinary example of industrial response to military crisis. From 4 carriers lost to 14 Essex-class carriers in combat. Those workers have nearly all passed away now, but their achievement remains eternal. In humanity's darkest hour, when fascism threatened to extinguish freedom itself, American workers answered with unmatched productive power. The 4 carriers lost in 1942, the Lexington, Yorktown, Wasp, and Hornet, weren't merely replaced. They were multiplied. Each new carrier surpassed what had been lost. Each one stood as testament to democracy's capacity to transform disaster into triumph. Japan didn't lose to American strategy or superior tactics. They lost to Margaret Thompson and her welding torch. They lost to millions of ordinary Americans who proved something essential. Democracy's ultimate strength lies in the unlimited productive capacity of free people united in purpose. From 4 carriers lost to 14 Essex-class carriers in combat, the numbers tell a story of transformation. That story stands as history's greatest testament to what free people can accomplish when their freedom faces genuine threat. They didn't just build ships, They built victory and freedom and the future itself. Their legacy remains eternal, inscribed on the memorial at Newport News Shipbuilding. Here, American workers answered tyranny with steel, fascism with freedom and defeat, with the greatest production miracle in human history.